So bone remodeling is involved in bone growth, and this is where when you have ossification occur, there's usually woven bone that's produced first, and then it's remodeled to become cancellous and compact bone. And so it can change the bone shape based on stress. There's bone repair and in calcium ion regulation. So when we looked at the humerus bone, there's a deltoid tuberosity. There's actually a bump there just because that's where the deltoid attaches and there's stress on that bone. Why is this not working? And so the relative thickness of the bone will change as it grows. It's just constantly being modeled by the osteoclast and osteoblast. And those new osteons can form in the bone, and that's when the osteoclasts enter it and can replace bone. Okay, same stuff. And then in repair, this would be like in a bone break if there's an injury to the bone. There's a hematoma that forms, which is just a big blood will turn into a clot then, and then that clot will form into a callus. It's just a little harder. It's a massive tissue that forms, and that will help connect the two bones. So you really want to get that. At this point, you need to have those bones set. If they aren't straight with each other and you don't get them set, then they can grow and repair themselves crooked. Internally, there's blood vessels that grow into the hematoma where the macrophages will clean up stuff, any debris, any bacteria, depending on if it's open to the outside of the wound or outside of the body. Osteoclasts break down that dead tissue, and then there's granulation tissue, like what we saw with tissue repair. Granulation tissue is also formed there. Then chondroblasts come in and make that callus into more of a cartilage formation, and then the osteoblasts will come in and change that into bone. And externally, there's what's called a collar, but you see how this is kind of bumped out a little bit? That's the collar around the bone. It will eventually get remodeled so that it's smooth again along that bone. You may be able to tell that it's been fractured, but it should look pretty much like any normal bone. So like in CSI and whatever, if they look at bones, they can tell if it's been fractured within a certain amount. It's because it would still have this collar, or you could see it's a little wider at that point for a certain amount of time until it's healed completely. Callus ossification, then that callus is replaced by woven cancellous bone, and then that cancellous bone is very delicate and so can break very easily, which is why that's why they would put you in a cast if possible to stabilize your arm or leg or whatever. And then the bone remodeling occurs there, where we'll replace that with compact bone, and it will sculpt, and eventually this widening here is going to smooth out and become just like the old bone. So as the bone is getting remodeled, it's got to use a lot of calcium, so it draws that calcium in from the blood. And then if the blood level gets too low, the body will stimulate that calcium be released. The osteoclasts start to break down the bone and release calcium into the blood to increase that bone or that blood calcium levels. And so there's two hormones that can help control the blood calcium levels. Parathyroid hormone, which is PTH, they symbolize it that way, and then calcitonin. So we'll look at those two hormones. And they really all have to do with the activity of osteoclasts and osteoblasts. Increasing activity, decreasing activity. So parathyroid hormone is secreted by the parathyroid. Good? Okay. Do you need me to go back? So PTH stimulates the increase in bone breakdown. So if the blood calcium level drops by a set point, below a set point, remember when we talked about positive, negative feedback, there's a set point your body has. If it's dropped below that set point, it's going to have a negative feedback system where it's going to try to bring the calcium level back up, and it will do that by increasing the activity of osteoclasts. So the osteoclasts start breaking down bone more, and that releases the calcium from the bone into the bloodstream, which increases the calcium levels in the blood. It also will increase calcium reabsorption from the urine through the kidneys. It can also increase the calcium absorption in your intestines. And so when your blood calcium levels drop, that's what stimulates the PTH. Calcitonin is secreted by the thyroid, and it will decrease in osteoclast activity. So once your calcium levels have gotten to a point and it's raised above the set point quite a ways, your body will secrete calcitonin, which would decrease the blood calcium level by decreasing the osteoclast activity. So the osteoclasts aren't breaking down the bone as much, not putting as much calcium back into the blood, and so it'll kind of stabilize that way. So they work together. This is just a picture where calcium is going from the blood into the bone, and then PTH promotes and calcitonin inhibits calcium release back into the blood. Same with the urine in the kidneys and in your intestine. So bone fractures, open or compound, as when a bone breaks and protrudes out of the skin. So the bone may be sticking out of the wound. Now it may break, protrude out of the skin, but then go back into the skin, so you just have an open wound still there and might not be able to see the bone, but it's still considered compound. A simple or closed fracture is when the skin's not broken, and these are all different types of simple fractures. So incomplete does not extend across the bone, complete does. A green stick fracture is the incomplete fracture that's on the convex side of the curve. So if this would be, in this picture, the convex side on the outside, the inside would be more concave, so this would be, the green stick would be on the outside of that bone. A hairline is where you have two sections of bones that do not separate, but there's a fracture there. Stress fractures, a lot of times are a type of hairline fracture. It says it's common in the skull bones because you might have a little fracture here, but it's not like there's a space in between the bone. And then comminuted fractures are where there's a complete break, but there's several pieces of bone that would have broken off too. And so there'd be some bone floating around that they would either pin together or remove that way. Impact fractures is when one fragment is driven into the cancellous portion of the other fragment. So here in the hip area, the femur, the shaft of the femur has been pushed up and been forced into, it's been driven into the head of the femur, and so it's kind of been overlapped here. And then there's also classification based on the direction. Linear would be along the line, parallel with the bone. Transverse would be perpendicular, straight across. Spiral would be if there was a twisting motion and it broke the bone. And oblique is any angle other than parallel or perpendicular. And last thing, effects of aging. So as you age, bone matrix decreases, and so there's less collagen, which acted like that rebar in your bone to give it strength. So it's more brittle, which is why, coupled down, the increased tendency in bone fractures because your bones get more brittle. The bone mass itself will decrease, which is what osteoporosis would be, where you get porous bones. Your highest bone mass is around 30. Men are usually more dense, have denser bone because of testosterone and just greater weight. Because the more stress you put on a bone with weight-bearing activities, it can help build that bone up and make that bone stronger. Some other just tendencies. It says rate of bone loss increases tenfold after menopause just due to hormonal changes, which is why a lot of times older women you see osteoporosis in. The bone loss can cause deformity, a loss of height, pain, and stiffness. So you have a stoop posture when you see older people that have kind of a hunchback because of bone loss. Loss of teeth of your maxilla and mandible start to get really loose, or not loose, but weak and brittle. And then articular surface, which is at your joints, wears down. And there's a decrease in synovial fluid, which helps reduce the friction. So you just get a lot more friction, a lot more pain in your joints, which is where arthritis were to come in. So, and we did see in that video, well, you could kind of see the arthritis. Did we watch the ACL repair beginning? Yeah. On her joint, on the end of her joint, you could really see where the cartilage had been worn down, and that would be even worse in a arthritic joint.